Good morning to each one of you. Certainly good to be here, and also welcome each one here this morning. Here some time ago, there was a meeting or a panel discussion at the church about technology. And for some time, I've wondered about should there be kind of a conclusion to that whole thing. I thought it was left sort of open-ended, if you will. And so I've been thinking about that for a while. And I was thinking of a conclusion. And as I was studying and everything, I came to realize that there's just so much out there, there really is no conclusion. Technology is changing so rapidly, so much that, yeah, there probably is no conclusion as such. However, I would like to touch some on technology and to go through, and hopefully maybe we can, and at some point I'll be getting some input from you all as well, but hopefully we can learn something together. How does it affect us? Are we affected by it? Are we benefiting from technology and things like that? So anyway, going into that, if we go back to the beginning in terms of technology, I think technology kind of has a bad rap these days. And I think probably a lot of that is warranted, if you will. We were recently at a homestead festival in Columbia, Tennessee, and where 5,000 to 6,000 people come together. And technology kind of has a bad rap among those people. And so it's not just, I think it's all over as we see what it can do to people. However, technology is also a wonderful thing. This morning, technology was used to send some encouraging messages to me that they were praying for me. And so technology is also great. It can be a great thing. But if we go back to the first part of Genesis, we see here where God created the earth. And we observe the creation, the trees, the animals, us as humans, and the creativity that came out of that creation, to me, is just nothing short of amazing. And it shows you the God that we serve, our Father, and how creative He is. And I would like to especially note in Genesis in verse 26, the first chapter, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. And He blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And so here we see that God created man in His image and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And so what did that all involve? As God took man out of the dust of the earth, he was a man. At that point, was he alive or not? Was he just like an animal? And then He blew into his nostrils the breath of life. What happened at that point? I think that is where, coming out of that, I think that is where us as humans have something special, have been given something special. And one of those things is logic, the ability to reason. Some of you have more than that, more than some of us do, logic that is. But aside from all that, we can reason, we can think, we can process information at amazing speeds. And as we look at God's creativity through the creation and how that man is also created in the image of God, and I think part of that God, when He breathed into us, was that creativity that God has given to us. we all have certain elements of that within us, a certain amount of artisticness. What is on the board behind me there? Somebody that had at least some measure of artistic in them to draw that on the board. Someone like myself, I don't have very little of that, if you will. I can picture things in my mind, but it does not come out on paper, if you will. And so I think the fact that God blew into man, into his nostrils, the breath of life, is what gives man and women tremendous value and worth. And then he calls them to rule over his creation. And the root word for that is to subdue. It means to subjugate something, which means to bring it under dominion or control. So in other words, we're to steward his creation. And there's an inherent idea behind that stewarding, that subduing, that is going to require tools and technology, if you will. If we were to lean forward in the story of the Bible here, if we go to the Israelites as they come out of Egypt, it's clear that during their 400 years of captivity, that no doubt they learned a lot of things. They learned how to probably use tools and different things like that. In fact, in Acts 7:22, it says that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And it says that he was mighty in words and in deeds. And it seems like some of their laborers were as well. And if you go to Exodus 31, verse 1, it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, See, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah." And then look what he did here. It says, "I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning," meaning artistic works, "to work in gold and silver and in brass, and in cutting of stones, to set them, and in carving of timber, to work in all manner of workmanship." And so here we see Bezaleel using tools to create these beautiful vessels that are going to end up in the tabernacle and ultimately into the temple, using technology to build these things for the glory of God. God made him to be a creative person, and technology helped him to use the gifts that God had given him, a place to worship him. We can use technology to do a good work. God also called us to be fruitful and multiply and to subdue the earth, and is calling us to make good work. And by the way, we were talking about rest in our Sunday school. Work is actually a pre-sin mandate, if you will. You know, we think of working, we think of the curse, and we want to blame Adam, right? The fact that we got to go out there and work and slave and toil. If Adam would have only, or Eve, or whatever. But work is actually a pre-sin mandate. In fact, Jesus even said in John 5:17, it says, "My Father worketh hitherto," and he says, "I work." Now we know that Jesus worked when he was here, but even his Father in heaven worketh as well. And so it's not just us that, quote, work down here, but God is also working, and I think on our behalf as well. In fact, in Proverbs 22, verse 29, talking about being skilled in labor, it says, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." And so I don't know what kind of jobs that we all have. I don't consider myself working for, I respect my brother and all of those things, but I don't really see him as a high-ranking official, if you will. But here in Proverbs, it would apply that if you are skilled in your work and you've got good work ethics, we got to throw that in this day and age, that can land you a good job. a good paying job, if you will. And so the fact that we are created in the image of God gives us tremendous worth, tremendous value to go out and to engineer and to build things, marvelous things with artistic flair and design. And I think that's all the part of how God created us. Merely creating us as animals, you would never see the magnificent things that man has been able to build, if you will. However, with all that potential also comes the fact that soon after the creation, it becomes apparent that there is another realm where all that good can be taken and twisted into something that then becomes not so good. And evil exists. And man can use those things for their own destruction. And so for starters, you have Adam and Eve in the garden. You have Cain and Abel. And evil has been in operation ever since. I remember talking now more recent in terms of technology. I don't know how many of you heard about cloning, have already heard of cloning. You don't hear as much nowadays, but several years ago, they cloned a sheep, and the name of that sheep was Dolly. And we wonder, what is cloning? Cloning is a process that is used to create an exact genetic replica of another cell, tissue, or organism. And so the copied material, which has the same genetic makeup as the original, is referred to as a clone. So if you clone a pet or an animal, you can create what would look like an identical twin, if you will. And supposedly there are universities even going nowadays where you can, if your pet dies or whatever, you can send in a hair sample or whatever, and they literally can generate a clone ultimately of that animal through various processes. And so we might think, that is quite interesting. Imagine losing your pet, and you could get another pet that looks just like it, or at least pretty close, kind of like an identical twin would be. Do we stop with that? Does it end with that? Because now all of a sudden you have humans coming into the picture. One of the recurring themes in the writings of those people who want to pursue human cloning is that people may be used as a means to an end. And so if the end of whatever you're trying to achieve is worth it, we can use humans to achieve that. And it's the idea of creating people specifically to harvest organs or creating subhumans of low intelligence to do menial labor. And I think it's important that as Christians, I think it's important that we proclaim the fact that every person has intrinsic worth and value, not because of their genetic makeup or their societal usefulness or whatever, but all of us have intrinsic worth and value. And so while some might argue that as we developed our ability to manipulate genes and that we will be able to evolve to a higher level as humans and to be able to solve our many problems, and I think that's where maybe AI comes into the picture as well. But we know that biblically speaking, the problem is not our genes, if you will. The problems with humanity is not in our genes. The problem is a sin problem, okay? That's where the problem is. The problem with evil in the world is not a DNA problem. It's our hearts. That's the problem, is our hearts. And our heart is a heart of sin, and we have inherited that. I like to look at the Tower of Babel now. That is very interesting because here in Genesis, not long, I'm not sure how long, but after the flood, you have the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's a story of people. And what is interesting is it's a story of people using technology, mind you, to disobey God. And I think, by the way, Babel, the story of Babel, if you will, I think represents Babylon, which is the ancient city that opposes God. Babylon appears all throughout the Bible, however, using whatever it can to make its name great. Even the Apostle John had a vision of Babylon the Great as an adulterous woman. In Revelation 17:5, it says, "And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." And I think the Tower of Babel, if you study that all the way through the Bible, Babylon came out of that. And it's simply the idea of something that is trying to lift itself up to make a name for itself. But one of the first things we notice in this story of Babel is it's a tower that's made out of bricks, okay? Made out of bricks. And we might think, but the fact is someone invented something new. Someone invented something new, which was a brick and mortar. And it allowed people to do something they hadn't been able to do before. Did you know that technology as simple as a brick can be used for evil purposes? God originally called the people to fill the earth, but instead they congregate together and they build a city and a tower to become like God. And notice how brick technology helps them rely on themselves instead of God. If you go to Genesis chapter 11, verse 3, it says, "They said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.'" And they use brick instead of stone, okay? Stone, and we'll get to brick versus stone in a little bit, but they use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. In verse 4, "And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.'" And notice the very thing that God wanted them to do was to scatter, if you will, and replenish the earth. So they use their technology, bricks and tar, essentially to commit idolatry, to worship themselves instead of God. And so I'd like to hear a little bit, so what is wrong with bricks? Is there anything wrong with bricks? I happen to live in a brick house. Any thoughts? Is a wooden house, is a vinyl house, is that more biblical than a brick house is? What do you all think? Okay? Or maybe a stone house. That would be very biblical, right? Stone houses, they last for a long time. I think brick houses do as well, but probably not quite as long as stone does. Especially if you go to Europe and look at some of those castles that date, way back in the, even pre-1000 AD. Okay, well, let me ask you this question. What is the difference between a brick versus a stone? We had gotten some landscaping done at our place, and the question was, do you want to have stone, like real stone, or do you want to have pavers, which is, man-made? Stone was quite a bit higher price-wise than what the pavers were. I'd like to hear, what is the differences between a brick versus a stone? What is something unique about a brick? Anyone? Okay, it's man-made. Okay, yes, a brick is man-made. What else? Anything else that's different about a brick versus a stone? Okay, it's made in a mold. And so something made in a mold is what? They all look the same, right? If you would find a brick that's uniformly cut 90 degrees and you found that in nature, would you say God made that? Okay. So they're man-made, as was mentioned. You will not find a brick occurring in nature. They are identical and uniform. In fact, it's very hard to distinguish one brick from another. If you're laying brick, I remember laying brick at our house, and if one brick, if the mason gets one brick and it breaks or something, he'll reach down and get another brick. You don't have to choose now which brick I'm going to put where or whatever. They're all uniform. They all look the same, essentially. They are functionally interchangeable. A brick can serve equally well anywhere in a wall. However, when you look at stones, they are completely different. What is unique about a stone? What is unique about a stone? Anyone? Okay, yes. You won't find a stone completely identical to another one. Okay? Anything else? So they're all different. Any other difference? They're not man-made, right? They're made by God, and that is important to note. They are unique in shape, in size, strength, and purpose. They are not interchangeable. Okay? When building roads or walls, you need to find the unique stone or style of rock or stone for the job. How many bricklayers do we have in here? Yeah, kind of what I thought, okay? Not too many. And I'm definitely not a bricklayer. However, if there were several bricklayers in here, you could ask how many stone layers are in here. And you would find even a smaller amount of stone layers, if you will. Fairly easy to lay brick in one sense, but stone is a little bit different. Just because there are many bricklayers out there, there's not a lot of stone masons, because stones come in all shapes and sizes. You need a certain artistic gifting to become a stone mason. Because stones, every size vary, and so you need to sort of piece it together, a little bit like a puzzle, if you will. And so if we go to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 5, it says, "To whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed, or you could say rejected, indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious." And then it says, "Ye also as lively stones." It doesn't say bricks, but lively stones or living stones are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. And so we see here that God is inviting us to come to Him. He doesn't want us to be like the people in Genesis 11 who migrated east away from God. He wants us to migrate towards Him and into His hands. And when we place ourselves in God's hands, this is important, He forms us and creates us into living stones, uniquely gifted, uniquely placed in His house, set apart for His unique purpose for our lives. However, when we don't come to God and we place ourselves into the hands of culture, or I would say Hollywood culture, if you will, or we could say the Babylon culture, the culture of Babel, when we place ourselves into their hands, we will be made in the image of those people. Any culture or group of people that is trying to make a name for themselves. And when we do that, we will think like them, we act like them. We're going to be just another brick in a man-made wall that will soon crumble. As Christians, I think all of us can have an effect in the small community, whatever community that you live in. You can have a positive effect as a lively stone, not just a brick, okay? Become a brick. You just become like, the people that you follow, the people that you're around, if you will. But God is calling us to become lively stones. So the question for us today, as we look at technology, and as we look at the Tower of Babel and the technology that was used, something as basic as a brick, what Babylon culture are we bowing down to today? Now, Jesus never came to tell the people to switch cultures or introducing a different culture. I think he came to offer us a way out of our hopeless situation, to transform a hard heart into a soft heart that seeks to lift up the name of Jesus, not ourselves, regardless of what culture you happen to be a part of. And so it's important that we should never bow down to culture. We want to lift up Jesus Christ and only him. But I think our culture should complement whatever culture that we are a part of. And I know that's one thing I like about living in the South is just me now. If you're from the North, you can certainly serve God just as easy up there, right? And I got to be careful how I say this, or I might be digging myself into something I don't intend to. But in the South, I feel like it's more palatable. It's a culture that is easier, if you will, to live out our Christian experience. We're around people that we do have a lot of similar values. And then even if you look at our Anabaptist culture, if you will, it's a culture that I think should complement our Christian experience. Being at the Homesteaders of America Festival, you get to meet and talk with a lot of people, and they are all wanting a certain culture, if you will, a certain culture of living off the land. And you have a lot of people that you talk to that are leaving the corporate world, that are leaving making 6+ figure incomes to do what? To go back to living off the land. And I think that you see a lot of people going back to that, growing and raising your own food. I think that's one element that we as Amish Mennonite people are losing, is simply that, is growing and raising, living off the land. And part of technology, if you will, part of our global food supply chain has become so modernized, it's just much easier just to go out there and buy your food, right? The amount of time that it takes to invest into growing your food, for a lot of people, we're just too busy, right? Technology, so many time-saving devices that we have, we're just more busy than ever, seems like. We don't have time to spend hours out in the garden getting our hands dirty in the soil. And I'm talking to myself, first of all. I tend to be that person that it's easier just to go out there and buy our food, and, that's it. But anyway, going back to the Tower of Babel, we see here that these people are trying to make a name for themselves when God desires us to make his name known. They're saying this tower will keep us from being scattered over the earth, when God had already commanded them to fill the earth. God created us to glorify him and to enjoy fellowship with him. And so in the big picture, considering all of that, in the big picture, as we look at the Tower of Babel, unity apart from God is a bigger threat to God's children than being scattered over the earth. God would rather us be divided and dependent on him than unified and independent. And so he confused their language and he scattered them. But God did not leave us scattered and divided. Thousands of years later, on the day of Pentecost, Babel got unraveled and the curse got reversed. At Babel, Tower of Babel, one language became many. At Pentecost, many languages all heard one message in Acts 2:6. At Babel, a people gathered were scattered. At Pentecost, people who had been gathered were united. At Babel, God's people were together to make a name for themselves. After Pentecost, people dispersed to make God's name known and famous. And so the question for us today is, are you a living stone or are you a brick? Are you using the technology that God has entrusted to you? I think, of course, the big glaring thing is the internet. It has allowed people to stay connected in a way that we never have been before. It's opened opportunities that we've never had before. But along with that, you hear a lot of cyber bullies, people who groom youngsters online, scam artists conning people out of loads of money. And all of these abuses have one thing in common. They all have one thing in common, and that is they are a result of human decision. Okay? Sometimes it's easy. The easy route would be just to blame technology. You know, that's sort of the easy thing. Just eliminate technology and then, But the reality is all of that is a result of human decision. The decision to abuse someone is a human decision. Abuse or grooming a young person online is a human decision. Scamming someone is the act of a person. Scanning someone out of money is a human decision. Human action, human decision causing pain and suffering to others. Technology is merely the tool. And so I will say in this day and age of technology, and I don't want to downplay a lot of the dangers, especially with social media and how it can come in. There's many times we can go on social media and we can find encouragement and all of those things. So I don't want to downplay that. There's a lot of benefits in social media. However, there's a flip side, and this is actual research studies that have been done. And I see myself so much in this. And I'll just say it read it here for what it's worth with regards to social media. The risk for the reward. Social media has a reinforcing nature. Using it activates the brain's reward center by releasing dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical linked to activities such as food and social interaction and things like that. The platforms are designed to be addictive and are associated with anxiety, depression, and even physical ailments. According to the Pew Research Center, 69% of adults and 81% of teens in the U.S. use social media. This puts a large amount of the population at increased risk of feeling depressed, anxious, and ill over social media use. But what makes users come back for even more when it can literally make them sick, And I've experienced that. You go on Facebook or wherever it is, and how many times have you been on there and you just like, why did I even come on here and look at this post or that post or things like that? Let me keep reading. When the outcome is unpredictable, the behavior is more likely to repeat. Think of a slot machine. If game players knew they were never going to get money by playing the game, then they would never play, Sperling says. The idea of a potential future reward keeps the machines in use, and the same goes for social media sites. One does not know how many likes a picture will get or who will like the picture, and when the picture will receive likes. The unknown outcome and the possibility of a desired outcome can keep users engaged with the sites. And so I thought that was quite interesting. So I think as we look at social media, there's a lot of good that we can do. We can encourage people. There's many posts that are uplifting and all of those things. But at the same time, you must be very aware of the other part of that. There's people that use social media to somehow, it becomes their identity. Maybe with how many likes someone gets or, whatever. They use it to prove their worth. And I think we need to realize that our identity is in Jesus Christ. That's where it's at. So if you use social media, let's use it as a means to put it to good use. to be that encouragement to each other. We must be very careful before we blame technology for so many of the world's problems and say it's ruining our world. After all, imagine if the inventors of the brick had said that. No buildings, no houses, no hospital. You see, at its best, technology advances the world. It makes it better. It makes us all better, healthier, more connected, more educated, with more freedom and knowledge. It can, even transform our lives, if you will. It's the abuse of technology by the human race which is so disastrous. And not only criminals who abuse it, it's also empire builders. Men and women, organizations who want to make themselves gods, who want to dominate and oppress and keep people beneath them so that their empire flourishes. But the truth is, we aren't gods. None of us are. No amount of technological advancement, achievement, or power will ever make us so. Abuse of new technology does ultimately expose the imperfections of humanity, and hopefully we will begin to see this brokenness that is laid before us, and then see just the depth of our need for grace, for mercy, forgiveness, unconditional love, and acceptance. And I think that's something that all of us need, all of us desire, all of us want, and that is what can bring us together. God calls all of us to be responsible stewards of technology, not abusers of it. And so the challenge for us today is, let's use technology to advance God's kingdom. Let's use it to encourage each other as we walk on this pathway of life. Thank you, and let's kneel for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, as we come before you this time, we thank you for your blessings, and thank you for the many situations, the many examples in your word that we have with regards to how to use technology and the use of it, Father. And we thank you that we can use it as a means to further your kingdom and to encourage each other. And just be with each one of us, Father. As a church, just bless each one as we go from here. Just lead, God, and direct us according to your will. We pray in Jesus' name.